They laughed at him, dismissed him, treated him like he didn't belong in a courtroom. But when he uncovered the truth behind a massive fraud, the entire court and the judge was left stunned. This is the true power of persistence, legacy, and one man's fight for justice. Marcus Bell didn't look like someone who belonged in a courtroom. His suit was dated, his shoes scuffed, and his tie hung just slightly crooked. But as he stepped into the Jefferson County courthouse, every step carried a quiet determination. He wasn't a lawyer, he'd never claimed to be. But today he was going to defend his late mother's home, her legacy from being devoured by a corporate developer. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Opposing counsel, Dana Whitlock, a polished attorney with a reputation for dismantling self-represented defendants, smirked at the sight of Marcus. She whispered something to her assistant, and they both chuckled. The judge, Carlton R. Mathers, looked down from the bench, his silver-rimmed glasses slipping slightly down his nose. "Mr. Bell," the judge said, voice thick with amusement, "you're representing yourself today." Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." A soft wave of laughter rippled through the back rows. Whitlock folded her arms, fully expecting a short, effortless win, but Marcus wasn't here to argue. He was here to dismantle a lie brick by brick, and he wasn't leaving without a fight. "Very well," Judge Mathers said, barely concealing his condescension. "Let's proceed, Ms. Whitlock. Your opening, Dana." Whitlock stood smoothly, adjusting her blazer with choreographed grace. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter," she said confidently. "The property in question was legally foreclosed upon. My client Eaton Holdings acquired it through due process after Mr. Bell's mother failed to meet loan obligations. We're simply here to finalize the transition." She didn't so much as glance at Marcus as she spoke, gesturing toward him as if he were invisible. "This case is not about sentimentality," she continued. "It's about law, contracts, and compliance. And my client followed every requirement." Judge Mathers nodded along. When she returned to her seat, she looked satisfied. Marcus remained calm, slowly standing. He held a slim folder in his hand and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, opposing counsel is correct. The law matters," Marcus began. "But the question is, did they actually follow it?" The smirk on Whitlock's face faltered slightly. "I spent 6 months researching foreclosure law, deed transfers, and the patterns of companies like Eaton Holdings. What I found, what I'll show you, suggests something deeply wrong with this case." Now the room leaned in. For the first time, Whitlock blinked. Marcus took a step forward. "Before we go further, I respectfully request the court allow limited discovery," he said, handing a motion to the bailiff. "I have reason to believe the plaintiff submitted falsified documentation in the foreclosure process." Judge Mathers' brows lifted slightly. "Falsified?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Fraudulent activity involving forged signatures and altered filing dates." A wave of whispers cut through the courtroom. Dana Whitlock's composure cracked. "Objection! That's a serious accusation, Your Honor. He has no standing to claim fraud." Judge Mathers raised a hand. "Let's hear what Mr. Bell has." Marcus placed 2 documents on the evidence table. "Here are 2 versions of the same mortgage agreement, one filed initially and one allegedly amended 3 months later, after my mother had a documented stroke and was medically incapacitated." He pointed to the signatures. "They don't match. And if you look at the timestamp on the second filing, Your Honor, that document was signed the day after my mother was admitted to Westlake Hospital in a coma." The room went silent. Judge Mathers leaned in, suddenly attentive. Whitlock sat rigid, eyes darting to her paralegal. Something had shifted. Marcus had the room now. Judge Mathers motioned for the clerk to bring the documents up. His eyes scanned them quickly, but his face shifted slowly from vague interest to concern. "Sons." "Whitlock," he said, tapping the forged signature, "do you have the original wet-signed documents to verify this amendment?" Whitlock straight-shinned. "We would need time to retrieve them, Your Honor." Marcus spoke up. "Your Honor, that document was used to justify a foreclosure on a home held in a trust. And if it was forged, then Eaton Holdings not only acted unlawfully, they preyed on a sick elderly woman." The judge stared at the signature again. "You said your mother was in a coma during the alleged signing." "Yes, I have medical records from Westlake Hospital, certified, showing she was unconscious for 9 days starting the morning before this document was dated and signed Dana." Whitlock finally stood. "We object to this line of argument. The defense is attempting to derail the case with conjecture." "Ms. Whitlock," the judge cut in, "your objection is noted. But I find Mr. Bell's claim serious enough to pause these proceedings pending document verification." Whitlock blinked. Her smooth narrative was unraveling. and the courtroom could feel it. Marcus remained composed, but his fingers clenched tightly behind the lectern. He had to keep going. Your Honor, this isn't the first time Eaton Holdings has used questionable amendments to seize property. I've gathered 4 additional cases dismissed quietly where documents were filed posthumously or with unverified notaries. He handed over a second folder. The judge flipped through it slowly, jaw tight. Where did you find this? I've spent the last 6 months reading every foreclosure case in the county. Marcus replied, public records, docket notes, and legal archives. These patterns aren't accidental. They're systematic. Judge Mather set the folder down slowly. I want Eaton Holdings' legal team to provide full chain of title documents, notarized statements, and wet signature verification by Monday. Dana Whitlock's lips parted in disbelief. Your Honor, that's an unusual burden for a preliminary hearing. This is no longer preliminary, the judge said, voice low. This is potentially criminal. Gasps stirred behind Marcus. He didn't smile. He couldn't afford to, not yet, because winning wasn't just about saving the house. It was about exposing the machine built on silent theft, and Marcus Bell had just cracked its first gear. The courtroom had shifted. Marcus could feel it in the way people leaned forward now, the way Judge Mathers no longer looked past him, but directly at him. But with attention came pressure. Dana Whitlock leaned over to whisper sharply to her paralegal. They scrambled through files, flipping pages, their confidence visibly shaken. Behind them, representatives from Eaton Holdings exchanged tense looks. Marcus knew what that meant. They hadn't expected resistance. They had built their cases on assumptions that poor families wouldn't fight, that sons of stroke victims wouldn't notice, that self-represented defendants wouldn't uncover patterns, but Marcus had. He continued, I also request the court issue a preservation order. If Eaton Holdings deletes or alters digital records, we may lose proof of a larger pattern of document manipulation. Judge Mathers leaned back. I will consider the motion. For now, Ms. Whitlock, do not destroy or alter any case-related material. That is a direct order from this court. Whitlock gave a stiff nod. Outside reporters had started gathering. Word was spreading about a man who came to defend a single home and may have cracked open a much bigger scandal. And Marcus, he wasn't intimidated. He was just getting started. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, lit by a single lamp, surrounded by boxes of paperwork, some from court archives, others from families. He had quietly interviewed over the past few months. His hands were sore, his eyes strained, but he kept flipping pages. In one folder was a handwritten note from Mrs. Delgado, an elderly woman who had lost her home under similar circumstances. They said I signed a deed, but I don't even write in cursive anymore, she had told him. He stared at that note, knowing there were dozens like her. People who had been too tired, too confused, or too alone to challenge what was happening to them. That's what companies like Eaton counted on, silence. But Marcus had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. He circled inconsistencies, cross-checked dates, built timelines. He wasn't just defending a home now. He was building a case of systemic fraud. At 3 a.m., he sent one last email to the county clerk, requesting court access logs to see who had filed Eaton's disputed documents and when. Then for the first time in days, he allowed himself to sleep, because tomorrow, the real storm was coming. When court reconvened the next morning, the atmosphere had completely changed. The local news van parked outside wasn't there for a routine foreclosure hearing anymore. Inside the benches were full activists, students, and even a few off-duty attorneys sat shoulder to shoulder watching the case unfold. Dana Whitlock looked exhausted. She'd lost her glow. Her opening remarks were curt and defensive, filled with procedural objections, but Judge Mathers brushed most of them aside. Mr. Bell, do you have further evidence you wish to submit? He asked. Marcus stood and held up a thick folder. Yes, Your Honor. I have evidence that Eaton Holdings used the same notary whose license expired last year on 7 different property transfers, including my mother's. He handed it over. The courtroom stirred again. Whitlock immediately objected. Irrelevant. These are isolated incidents unrelated to the foreclosure at hand. Marcus didn't flinch. 7 properties, 1 expired notary. 1 company. That's not coincidence, that's procedure. Judge Mathers studied the papers in silence. He turned to Whitlock slowly. Ms. Whitlock, do you have any explanation for this notary's expired credentials appearing on so many recent filings? Whitlock hesitated. I'll need to speak with our records department, but everyone in that room knew the wall was cracking. Later that afternoon, Judge Mathers recessed the hearing for 10 minutes. The buzz in the gallery was electric. As Marcus stepped into the hallway, a man in a suit approached him. "Mr. Bell," he asked, extending a card. "I'm Anthony Rhodes, Civil Litigation. If you decide to file a class action suit, I'd like to talk." Marcus nodded but tucked the card away. He wasn't thinking about lawsuits. He was still in the middle of saving his mother's house, but it confirmed what he already sensed. This wasn't just about him anymore. Back in the courtroom, Judge Mathers returned, visibly changed. His tone had lost all amusement. "I've reviewed the evidence presented thus far," he said, "and I find substantial reason to believe material fraud may have occurred in this foreclosure." He paused. "I'm placing an immediate hold on the property transfer. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for formal review." Dinah Whitlock went pale. She opened her mouth but said nothing. The courtroom was dead silent. Then Judge Mathers looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Bell," he said, "I suggest you prepare for a much larger fight. This case is no longer just yours." Marcus sat down slowly, trying to absorb what just happened. He wasn't sure if he had won, but he knew one thing: they weren't laughing at him anymore. As he packed his folders, several spectators approached him, some to shake his hand, others to ask how he did it. A young man no older than 20 leaned in. "My aunt lost her home too. Can you teach me how to fight back like that?" Marcus smiled, overwhelmed but hopeful. "It starts with reading everything. Don't trust the surface, follow the paper." Across the room, Whitlock was already on her phone, her voice low and urgent. Eaton Holding's world had been shaken, and Marcus had done it without a law degree, a firm, or a title. Judge Mathers stood from the bench, gathering his notes. Before he exited, he looked down at Marcus once more. "Impressive work," he said quietly. "You've reminded this court what the law is really for." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." As he stepped out into the afternoon sun, a small crowd had formed, waiting. Not for a show, for a man who proved that knowledge, courage, and persistence could dismantle even the most polished lies. And Marcus Bell walked out, not just as a son defending his mother, but as a man who made the system listen. By the next morning, Marcus's name was in the local papers. "Self-represented man uncovers courtroom." Fraud, one headline read. But with recognition came retaliation. Marcus received an anonymous email. "Back off, you're in over your head." He didn't reply, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He wasn't naive. Exposing a company like Eaton Holdings meant stepping into dangerous territory. They weren't just rich, they were connected. The kind of connected that could silence stories, bury evidence, or ruin reputations. That same afternoon, his mother's utility bills mysteriously surged. Then her Medicare benefits were flagged for a routine review. Marcus knew these weren't coincidences. They were pressure tactics. At court, Dinah Whitlock returned with a new team, 2 additional lawyers from a prestigious D.C. firm. "Your Honor, my client feels this courtroom is no longer impartial. We request the case be moved to federal court," one of them said. Judge Mathers didn't flinch. "This court has jurisdiction, and until credible bias is proven, we're not moving anywhere." Marcus stood up. "They're not afraid of me. They're afraid of what I found." Judge Mathers looked at him. "Then you'd better be sure, because they'll come at you with everything they've got." Marcus didn't blink. Let them honor that week, a woman knocked on Marcus's door. She was in her late 60s, wore a cardigan 2 sizes too big, and had a quiet but intense look in her eyes. "You don't know me," she said, "but I watched your hearing." She introduced herself as Mildred Jameson, a retired legal assistant from the clerk's office. "I've seen a lot over the years. Eaton's filings never sat right with me, but I didn't have the power to challenge them." "You do." She handed him a flash drive. "These are time-stamped scans I kept over the years. Some were altered days after they were officially filed. That's not just unethical, it's illegal." Marcus hesitated. "Why me?" She sighed. "Because you remind me of my son." He passed. "But he fought too." Marcus took the drive. "Thank you." Inside, the data revealed exactly what he needed. Proof that several deeds had been retroactively modified after foreclosure notices had been issued. It wasn't just about one house now. It was a blueprint for corporate fraud. He called his cousin, an IT forensic expert in Atlanta. "I need help analyzing metadata. Can you come? I'm on the next flight," she said. Marcus wasn't alone anymore. He had allies and evidence. Monday's hearing began with tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Dana Whitlock's team had grown again. Now 4 attorneys flanked her. Eaton Holdings had even sent a public relations advisor who stood silently in the back evaluating the optics. But Marcus wasn't intimidated. He had Mildred's files, digital proof, and 2 affidavits from homeowners with matching stories. This time he came prepared with a laptop and a projector. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to walk the court through a timeline of document tampering, highlighting metadata that contradicts the original filing dates. Whitlock stood. Objection. He's not a certified forensic analyst. Judge Mathers raised a hand. Overruled, but proceed carefully. Mr. Bell, slide by slide. Marcus walked through each inconsistency. The timestamps, the signature overlays, the date mismatches, each one like a hammer blow. By the 4th slide, murmurs had filled the courtroom. Even Judge Mathers leaned forward, taking notes. Ms. Whitlock, he said slowly, this court will need your client's original unaltered server records within 48 hours. Dana's mouth tightened. That could take time. You'll find it, he said coldly, or this court will issue subpoenas. Outside, the reporters waited again. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was a reckoning. 2 days later, Eaton Holdings tried to buy silence. A courier arrived at Marcus's door with a thick envelope labeled confidential settlement. Offer inside was a check for $500, $1,000, and a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus read the fine print. If he signed, his mother's house would be returned and he'd walk away with $500,000. But in return, he'd drop all claims, destroy all evidence, and stay silent for life. He stared at the check for a long moment. Then without hesitation, he tore it in half. Later in court, he held the NDA up for everyone to see. They offered money to make this go away. He said, his voice steady, but if I take this, how many more grandmothers will lose their homes? How many families will be crushed in silence? Judge Mathers' eyes narrowed. Ms. Whitlock, was your client aware of this offer? Whitlock paused. It was a standard settlement proposal. No? Marcus interrupted. It was a bribe. The judge turned to the stenographer. Put that on record. That day, Eaton Holdings officially lost control of the narrative and the courtroom began to shift. Not just in law, but in conscience. By the end of that week, Marcus had become a symbol. The courtroom was packed now, not just with media, but with regular people. Single mothers, veterans, retirees, some holding signs outside Justice for the Forgotten Bell versus Goliath. His cousin had produced a clean forensic report. It was bulletproof. With it, Marcus filed a formal petition to initiate a class action lawsuit on behalf of 15 other families who had come forward. Inside, Dana Whitlock looked like a shadow of herself. Her voice trembled as she made objections. Her usual poise gone. She'd been part of a machine that operated without scrutiny until Marcus forced it into daylight. Judge Mathers reviewed the documents, then tapped his gavel. The court finds sufficient evidence to halt all pending foreclosures initiated by Eaton Holdings over the past 12 months. An independent audit will follow. A cheer broke out in the gallery. Marcus looked down at the worn folder in his hands, the same one that held his mother's original deed. This wasn't the end, but it was justice, and it had started with one man refusing to be laughed out of the room the day after the ruling. Marcus stood alone in the courtroom. Empty now, the benches once filled with whispers and doubt were silent. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Judge Mathers entered unexpectedly. Thought you'd be gone by now, he said, setting down his robe. I needed to see it without the noise, Marcus replied. To remember it for what it was, not just what it became. Mathers nodded, pausing beside him. You reminded me why I became a judge. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing people as files, not stories. Marcus looked at him. And now I see you. He extended his hand. Marcus shook it. There was no arrogance in the gesture, just quiet respect. As the judge turned to leave, he added, I hope you don't stop here. Law school's still an option. Marcus smiled. Maybe. But first I need to go home. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from something, he was walking toward it. Back in his mother's home, Marcus helped her plant jasmine along the front porch, her favorite flower. For a brief moment, life felt normal again. Then the phone rang. Marcus Bell. The voice asked, Yes, this is Elise Chang from the Department of Justice's Housing Rights Division. We've been following your case. We'd like to speak with you about joining a task force investigating predatory foreclosure practices. Marcus blinked. Is this a joke? No, sir. Your work exposed a pattern we've seen in other regions. We believe you can help. The call ended with a scheduled meeting in D.C. His mother, listening nearby, just grinned. Looks like your stupidness is contagious. He laughed, unsure whether he was overwhelmed or just beginning to believe this was real. Later that night, he opened the manila folder Mildred had given him. the one that started it all. Inside, he tucked in a photo of his grandmother smiling from years ago, holding him as a child. He whispered to it, "We kept your house and we kept your name clean." Weeks later, Marcus stood in a federal courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a key witness in a massive fraud investigation. Government attorneys quoted his findings. Senators referenced his courage in committee hearings. Media outlets dubbed him the man who brought Eaton down. Still, Marcus remained grounded. After his testimony, he left through a side door, avoiding the reporters. He wasn't chasing fame. He wanted change. As he walked outside, he saw a young girl sitting on the courthouse steps, her mother holding a foreclosure notice. He sat beside them. "That used to be me," he said. She looked up. "What happened?" "I fought and I learned how the system works so I could change it." The mother's eyes welled up. "Do you help others?" Marcus paused. "I didn't used to, but I do now." They exchanged numbers. It was the beginning of something new. A grassroots legal aid center led not by degrees but by lived experience and unshakable purpose. Within 6 months, Marcus founded the Bell Justice Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to exposing housing fraud and training underrepresented communities in legal literacy. Mildred joined as director of research. His cousin ran digital forensics workshops. Local students volunteered as interns, learning how to investigate filings and file pro se motions. What began as one man defending a home became a movement. Judge Mathers later invited Marcus to speak at a judicial ethics conference. "Because courts need reminding that the law belongs to the people," he said. During his speech, Marcus ended with, "I wasn't supposed to win. I wasn't supposed to understand the language of contracts or the cold logic of law. But I did, not because I wanted revenge, but because I couldn't let my grandmother's story end in silence." If the courts are the heart of justice, then we are its voice. The room stood in ovation. A year to the day after the final ruling, Marcus returned to the courtroom where it all began, this time with students from his first Justice Initiative workshop. He walked them through each part of the courthouse: the bench, the defense table, the jury box. "This is where they laughed at me," he said softly. "But this is also where I laughed last." One student raised her hand. "Do you think someone like me could win a case like that?" Marcus knelt beside her. "You don't need permission to fight for what's right. You just need to know how." "That's what I'm here for," they smiled. The room felt different now, lighter somehow. As they left, Marcus looked back once more, the courtroom bathed in the golden hue of late afternoon sun. No longer a battleground, now a birthplace of justice, of purpose, of change. Justice doesn't wear a title or carry a law degree. It lives in the heart of those who refuse to be silenced. Marcus Bell showed us that knowledge, when fueled by love and determination, can topple even the mightiest systems. Sometimes the most powerful lawyers aren't made in classrooms. They're born in the fire of life.